Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Constantly Calibrating Podcast, as always, live on Mixer. I am your host, Josh, joined by my special guest, Dylan Ilvento. Dylan, how are you doing today?
I am great. It's a snow day. Most of Virginia got covered in snow. I got the day off. My girlfriend got the day off of work today and tomorrow because Virginia doesn't know what to do with itself when it gets snowed in.
I can see that. I can only imagine. Like, Virginia is not a place I think of when I think of snow.
Or anything really.
Yeah, I think of it as the first speeding ticket I ever got was in Virginia. So
okay, yeah.
Did a road trip when I was 18 and had a very, very angry, I don't know if it was highway patrol, state trooper, what exactly it was, a very angry person pull me over, and to this day still don't know why I was pulled over. All I know is I got yelled at a lot and I had to switch places with my cousin to drive because I couldn't stop crying.
Oh wow.
I was scared out of my mind. I'd never been pulled over. This guy was legitimately a terrifying human being.
That's intense.
It was a thing, and that's my Virginia story. The place you
Yeah, that's fine. It sounds about right.
It's a good it's a good place to start from. Yeah, I'm excited to get chatting with you, Dylan, because so you were one of the people who responded to my little call for action, trying to find people to guest on the show and stuff like that. And when I received a bit more than I was expecting, and we were introduced, albeit briefly, at PAX West at the Messenger launch party by our friend Anya Combs, who Anya's been on a mental health breakdown podcast of mine, and I've always forget to actually have her on the Constantly Calibrating. Well, it's less forget and more like
just don't care. Whatever.
She sucks. She's actually wonderful, and I'm just like, I want to talk to Anya, but she seems busy, and I don't want to bother her half the time. So anyways, we were introduced, got a very, very, very brief chat before making the rounds and whatnot, and as the night takes us, but I wanted to talk to you because you have an interesting perspective on things. You are both, you have been and are on the media side of things, but you're also on the game developer side of things. So, just for a little really quick pitch, what do you do? Who do you work for? That kind of thing, just to give people an idea before we launch it.
Sure. I guess the easy one. Who do I work for? I basically work for myself. I'm kind of just I do run most of the stuff on my own. I'm the co-founder of a indie studio called Ward Games, and we are working on kind of small projects and prototypes and stuff, trying to see what we want to kind of work on long term. And then on the media side, I run a podcast called Wardcast, which is tied into the studio because I grew up listening to a lot of podcasts, and I always thought they were really good kind of storytelling vehicles for learning how people kind of evolve and adapt and learn over time. And I kind of wanted to make something like that, both as like a chronicle to what we do at the studio, quote unquote. It's basically just me. And then kind of get more kind of understand the game development side some more. I mean, there's some podcasts that do that. There are a lot of podcasts out there. I mean, Idle Thumbs obviously is a big one where those guys were all on the game dev side. But I've had a lot of co-hosts that are local in the Richmond, Virginia area that talk about the games they're working on. There's a pretty decently sized game development community here that I help run called RVA Game Jams, where we focus on making games. We kind of host 4 local game jams a year, tied into like the big major international ones, Ludum Dare and Global Game Jam. And so it's about not just being able to talk about current events and games, but also talking about like what we're working on and how we create it and things like that. And we have just so many different perspectives in our local area. And then I also bring guests on to talk about the stuff they're working on, whether it's on the media side or the game dev side.
Well, yeah, that's a lot, all in the same sphere, but also like branching outward. I like that you do this podcast kind of chronicling your studio essentially, because we are at this point in the game industry where, particularly on the indie side, actually really just across the whole thing, but on the indie side, there are so many different people that you have to find those ways to stand out and those different things. So having that chronicle, having that little hook, that additional media aspect, I think definitely pulls people in. Plus, we're in the era of personality-based broadcasting and personality-based just industry in general. Actually, a lot of people refer to it thinking about like the Twitch mixer streamers and YouTube and stuff like that, but it's across everything. I mean, just not to get political, but we have a personality-based presidency at this point. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's kind of like what the entire world has really shifted into in the last 10 years. So adding that personality aspect, that personality side to your studio is good. It's a good way to gain and work forward with that attention.
Yeah, I mean, it's very slow acting content marketing. I'm not going to pretend we have the hugest audience on either side.
Oh, sure.
But I don't know. I like doing it because game development could be such a long process, and you can see a lot of, back when I was like really active on Tumblr and following a lot of game devs on Tumblr, RIP, but you'd see a lot of projects in like their very nascent stages, and then they would kind of go underground and continue working, and then they pop up a couple years later. It's like, oh, I remember that game, like Fight Night. I don't know if you've seen this game. It was at PAX East. It was also at MagFest. I saw it this year, but it's this really cool game. It's a dungeon crawler, like in the traditional like first person old school style, like Legend of Grimrock, but you are basically just a pugilist knight. You just fight with your fists, and it's got this really like hypnotic kind of psychedelic art style and like a lot of dithering out the ass. I remember seeing that game like years ago on Tumblr, and then it popped up again. I was like, holy shit, like this game just kind of came out of nowhere, and I just kind of forgot about it. But I'm glad I remembered. I'm glad I saw it originally because it kind of ingratiated itself to me.
Oh yeah, okay. I just pulled it up. I was trying to trying to find it. Yeah, that's
right.
Yeah. So, but go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say. So what's cool about that is that like these devs are able to work on it for a long time. Mm-hmm. They came back up when it was ready to kind of finally be introduced to the world. But what sucks about that is that you're just kind of like tolling like quietly for years without anyone really knowing who you are, what you're doing, or you're not building that kind of like long-term marketing plan or whatever you want to call it. So what I like about the podcast is that we're constantly putting out content every week. So it's like, the game might take longer because of that, because podcasting is not, no work. There's a decent amount of effort. You know this, I know this. So it can cause like the game dev side to like take a little bit longer, but at least like people are getting consistent content from us. They're consistently like, we're staying in their mind.
Well, I mean, it's not just. I mean, it's a multi-marketing kind of thing, because you have just marketing. Your name is out there, even if whether it's 5 people seeing it or 100 people or 1,000 people, regardless of the number of people seeing it and in taking in the podcast and taking stuff in, it's still this amount of people who are coming back and seeing stuff, and maybe those people tell people, and you can create that marketing effect. But it's also the community development side of things, and community development in the last 5 years, I mean, at least, has been one of, if not the most important aspect of launching any game, particularly in the indie sphere. Because if you have a community built around your game, I mean, honestly, you can release a pretty mediocre game sometimes if the community really embraces. And like, no disrespect meant to anyone, but like, you can release games that are just don't have mass market appeal, are not as well tuned. They're in early access. They're really bare bones. But if you have that community built up, they will support you to sometimes a feverish, terrifying pitch.
Right. I mean, look at all these 4X games that are on Steam that like barely anyone knows about, but they're like selling gangbusters because they sell to their niche.
Yep. They know how to market. They know where they're selling to. But just like think about games that kind of fell off the radar and people maybe didn't forget about, but you would see like in different spheres and different places, people being like, hey, where's this, where's that, and then suddenly launching. I mean, we got Beyond and we got Ashen, and like in the case of the latter, like that was a game that I vaguely remember hearing about. I don't even remember when. I feel like a while ago, like a long while ago, and then suddenly it's like, oh no, it's out, and it's everyone's saying it's a game of game of the year potential. Sorry, what now?
Right. Yeah.
Like where did this thing just like suddenly come from? Because I consider myself pretty reasonably in tune with stuff. I follow enough places. I follow enough stuff. It's part of what I do is keeping up with stuff. And I completely had forgotten about that game until I was on a different podcast last week doing prediction stuff, and somebody said, "Hey, I wonder if Ashen's gonna be announced next week." And I was like, "I have no idea what the shit that is." The name is, and then I went to the website. I was like, "Oh, that's vaguely familiar."
Right. I saw some clips and footage of that, and I was like, "Oh, this seems cool." And then someone said Dark Souls. I was like, I'm sure. Back up. I'll back up here. I don't know if this is for me.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of my mentality on it as well. I was actually very excited. Austin Walker of Waypoint has been, posting about it, tweeting about it a lot.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, he's talking about this ever-growing town, this ever-growing thing, all these other aspects. And I'm like, this sounds cool. This sounds cool. He's like, and then and then somebody says, yeah, and that Dark Souls style combat. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Not feeling it. Not feeling that.
It's like, okay. I mean, I still to this day have never played a Souls style game. I've played. It's money I don't have right now, so maybe I'll look into it later.
Yeah. I've played Let It Die, which ain't a great game. Yeah. And people say it's a poor facsimile of a Souls-like, so maybe it's not the best example. But I also don't like Monster Hunter, so I just don't like that style of combat in whatever shade you give it to me. But
that makes sense. But we digressed into specific game talk and stuff like that. But yeah, it's this part of game development that so a lot of studios and always will kind of go into this bit of silence kind of thing, and it works for some. I mean, take the major AAA studios like Rockstar or BioWare can pretty much just not talk about a game, whether it's in development or not. They can just be quiet for a while. But in this indie sphere, you got to keep shouting to be heard above everyone else.
Right.
And I can imagine how tough that is with all the other aspects.
Well, I think it's a thing that there's shades of it, right? So like one shade is this is something my background, like education wise, like I was an art student at one point, and then I was a business student, and then I was like a computer science student. I
identify with that.
So I kind of have this multidisciplinary look of a lot of things, and I know like Zoe Quinn has said it in the past, like the reason she liked making games is because she got to do all these different fields of creation, whether it was art or writing or programming and all this other stuff. But I still think that stereotype persists of the artist that doesn't want to be involved in the business side of things at all, which I can respect to a certain extent. But then you need a publisher. Then you need someone that's going to kind of rep for you if you're not willing to do that. And I think there's a lot of devs that kind of either they do it because they have to, they do it begrudgingly, or they try to do it as least as possible so it doesn't hurt their souls, their artistic souls, by doing all this commercial stuff. And I can understand that totally, but like you're already fighting an uphill battle. It's already a Sisyphean task being a kind of unknown indie to selling a game that you can like have a living wage off of, let alone it's selling gangbusters. And so like you can't turn down any sort of thing. But so even if you accept that, like the next stage is like, okay, well then how do I do it well?
Yep.
Like what is market research? What is target marketing? What is all of this stuff? And I think that's a very hard nut to crack, especially in games where it's like you feel like you're building your castle on shifting sands, where it just feels like everything's moving all the time. We have a 4-year development cycle. What might have been in 4 years ago is not in now. What do I do? And that's why I really respect people like Mike Rose, who I had on my podcast earlier this year, and he runs No More Robots, that his indie publisher.
Oh no, I know Mike. He's one of my favorite people to follow on Twitter. His outlook and insight into the indies realm is fascinating, and like I love seeing his perspective on things. And also, Descenders is one of the best games of the year. Like surprisingly so. Like I did not expect a downhill bike game to appeal to me that much, but I love shit out of that game.
Right, we showcased at the PAX East panel, and we really kind of became enamored with it. But he is very kind of strong in his opinions about no, this is something that's solvable. It's not just all luck. You can't just cast your game into the wind and hope it catches the right gust and goes in the direction you want it to. Like, this is a solvable problem. Obviously he does a lot of talks at GDC and stuff about what the reality of the situation is, but a lot of his he's not giving you all of the nitty gritty because that's that's his competitive advantage.
Yeah.
Like, he's not going to share that directly with everyone because as much as he wants everyone to succeed, which I believe he does, he also like needs to make sure the games that he is repping are selling well.
Well, I mean, that's
yeah,
the whole aspect. You want to uplift and you want to help people out, but at the same time, if you have something that's working and you tell 100,000 different people how to do the same thing as you're suddenly not able to do the thing anymore.
Right.
It makes sense.
It's not working anymore.
Yeah, you have to. It literally for the whole. It's not even just for himself. For the whole, you have to keep. In, as it were.
Right. But yeah, that's how I feel about that stuff. It's, my podcast is a certain type of content marketing, but it's also something just for my self-care and mental well-being because I enjoy doing it. Like, I mean, I know people have done podcasts and then have stopped and they've had their reasons why, and I respect that. But I feel like, I don't know, the thing is just, my podcast is just constantly evolving. Like, we would do things like in 2017, we rarely had a guest on remotely. And then this year, just because of realities of like, hey, I can't do every weekend for my local host, it was like, okay, well then now we're switching to the schedule of we're alternating between local roundtable and remote guests. And we're just going to do that ad infinitum. And I think that's worked out really well, but that's like an evolution that you don't really expect, but you kind of have to adapt to. Or like the fact that I've never had, I think Alex Damrath, my one co-host, or Alex and Will, I guess, have been the longest standing co-hosts. But I have co-hosts change out basically every year. It's like, hey, I can't do this anymore, or I'm moving, I got a different opportunity elsewhere, so like I can't be on the show next year. And it's like, that's totally fine. But like, in my head, there's this thing of, but like the podcast that I really loved were like, it's a couple of people talking, and it's the same people for like years, and there's just something like enamoring about that, and you kind of chase that dragon a little bit. But I also like the idea of, okay, but now my thing's just constantly evolving, and it's never going to be the same. It's never going to be the same, and people will just kind of have to, get used to that constantly evolving thing. I think the alternating schedule helps with that because they don't just expect there to be the same people every other week or every week, because it's going to be a guest one week and then it's going to be back to the roundtable. So I kind of like it, even though like to me the idea of the perfect podcast is like a roundtable of the same people and they've been talking for eons, and so you get an idea of who they are holistically or whatever. Like, I like that, but you have to accept the realities of the situation.
I mean, as someone who's been doing this shtick for fast approaching the 7-year anniversary, the biggest self-fulfilling prophecy ever was naming my company Constantly Calibrating. Like, that was just meant as a Mass Effect joke. Didn't think about it, but I mean, it went from a duo show with one of my best friends to a trio show with another friend to the original host, and I having a falling on him leaving, to bringing a different host in, to turning it to a group of 4, to then rotating 4 group, to a guest show, to then it was, wow, it's so hard to do a live show every single Monday night at 6 p.m. Pacific time and actually get guests on it. And I would rather this be a guest show to suddenly it's now a whenever guests are available and it's just me talking to them, maybe a host. So like, it's just been this constant thing. And I was the same person, like, my show's a failure because I am not a Rooster Teeth podcast with the same cast. I am not a this with the same thing. And then one day I was just like, you know what? Whatever. That's not going to be my podcast. And even though I personally enjoy that ever evolving cast, I will just be the focal person with my rotating cast of characters, kind of thing. And once I got that in my head, it was suddenly like, wow, this is actually enjoyable again for the first time in a little while.
Right.
It's always a fascinating thing about content creation. And I think a lot of those little nuances that people don't think about, particularly on the podcasting side, where it's like, yeah, you want to just talk to your friend about video games. Cool. That is totally a show. But if you want to continue and keep the longevity of things, everything's going to go wrong, or everything's going to go right, but in a way you didn't expect it to go.
Right. And I mean, and that's why people create the myth of like most of marketing is luck, or most of creating like your audience is luck, which like I can understand, but there is a scientific element to it where you could say like, okay, this one did really well versus this one. Why did this one do well? And I mean, like, what's nice about having guests on, now we're getting super meta, is that like the guest then becomes your temporary champion of the show, and they share it to their audience, which might be bigger than your audience, and it's a really cool thing. I really like doing that, like introducing the alternating schedule of having remote guests on, like helps more people know about the show, and then directly helps us create a better show to get to more people.
Well, that's also the thing, is if you keep doing a show with the exact same cast of characters, that could be a fine show, but you can very easily stagnate with that, where you're not getting new ideas in, you're not changing you're not changing your worldview. And my favorite thing about podcasting and talking to people is I get to experience things I normally wouldn't experience. Different worldviews, different things like that. Constantly calibrating, it's not my preference, but as a person who likes to live and work in a diversive climate and stuff, we are primarily just a bunch of white guys in our mid-20s to mid-30s, and it's like that worldview is pretty shallow. Yeah, a lot of us have explored and have pulled other things in, but if we just did that same 4 to 6 man show, literally 6 man show, like it would just be like the same shit over and over and over again, and maybe somebody pulls in a new thought. But so you bring in the guests, and yeah, they bring more attention to you, but it just also just brings more knowledge, just brings more insight and just more understanding, stuff I never would have thought about. I mentioned, I think in the pre-show, I talked to Cissy Jones, a voice actor and a friend, last week, and just getting her view on being a woman in the voice acting industry was just fascinating shit I would have never thought about, because of just where I exist in this world.
Yeah, I had Kevin Snow on a little while ago, and they wrote some for Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, and then they also are working on Southern Monsters. And I think they found the show from Austin Walker sharing the PAX West panel, because he was on my PAX West panel, and it was this cool thing because I wanted to talk to them for a long time, so I reached out to them. They were like, "Oh, cool! It's like these games I heard of are on there," and so I was like, "Hey, let's schedule a time to get you on." And so I was talking to them, and I started talking about like their influences in their games, because they're indie, I'm indie. I was like, okay, like indie to indie, what kind of games are you playing? What kind of games you like? And I have, I will admit, I have a very kind of mainstream kind of taste profile, both mainstream indie and mainstream AAA. And when they were listing their games, they were like, oh, I like this Twine game, I like Michael Lutz's stuff, I like all this other stuff. I was like, I know of that stuff. I think I follow Michael Lutz on Twitter, but like I know vaguely of like the stuff. Obviously, I've heard of My Dad Works at Nintendo, his Twine game, but yeah, there was like that whole sphere that I wasn't really that familiar with, and it was great to have someone champion that to make me interested in checking that stuff out, because like that's also, like you said, a bunch of cis white hetero dudes, like we really don't want that, and I also just don't want to kind of listen to the same voices over and over for the rest of my life. Like I read a lot of Polygon, and I read a lot of Waypoint and a lot of Kotaku and stuff, and I listen to the Bombcast, and I listen to the Waypoint radio show and all this other stuff, but like I'm now trying to like, well, let's read more Unwinnable. Let's read more Deorbital. Let's check out Abnormal Mapping or Critical Distance, and check out these other smaller shows that like the big people are pointing to, and like check them out. And by people, I mean Austin Walker, because he does an awesome job about that. But
he is very good about that. And also, if not for him, I would have I only even have the vaguest idea of any of the things you just listed, because that's the nature of this.
Right. Or like Kevin Snow had a piece on Capsule Crit, and I was reading a bunch of Capsule Crit stuff. Like that one was that there's a really good one. It's a parody. It's like the white dude that made a dating sim, and like it's just basically a profile of a guy, and like talking about how brave he was and how many like norms he shattered by creating this dating sim or whatever. It's a pretty funny piece. I forget who wrote it, but I really like. I think Dia's doing some cool stuff running with Capsule Crit over there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one. That's like, it's just, you can only exist in your own bubble for so long, and I know a lot of people can live in there forever, but as a person approaching their mid-30s, like where's the fun in that? Where's the fun in living in my world where I'm only aware of the AAA games and my specific sphere of the indie stuff? Like, you mentioned Twine and stuff like that, and it's like, I don't think I've ever played a Twine game, but I'm fully aware of Twine related stuff and like making stuff in there, but like I only became aware of it last year when I was researching something.
You should not only should you play some Twine games, which I would recommend, like You Are Jeff Bezos, which is Chris Ligman's Twine game that got a lot of attention a couple weeks ago. You should also try making a Twine game, because Twine is one of those platforms. I wouldn't call it an engine, but one of those development platforms that's so easy to get into. I mean, it's just very basic logic, if else statements, and like, multiple choice kind of stuff, and it all exports into a web page. So like, especially for people that are interested in more narrative focused games, like starting there, like, I mean, obviously look at, like we said, Michael Lutz's stuff. You Are Jeff Bezos, Zoe Quinn, Depression Quest is a Twine game. Mm-hmm. For people that want to make that kind of narrative focused stuff, like Twine and Bitsy are like really good platforms to make that stuff, because it's all web based. Or, well, Twine's a siloed app, but it exports the web, and then Bitsy can be all web based. And there's it when you start making that stuff, and that's what I really like about our show, is that we can understand better, like we can understand kind of the pains and the pings that people go through, because like we've been there, like we've made that stuff. Like I don't understand, or I've never been in a AAA pipeline, so I can't really empathize with that, but at least I can understand the structure well, especially in a world where we're still dealing with people making assumptions about like how easy game dev can be, or like how lazy devs are being. You saw some of that stuff. I mean, I saw some of that stuff from my like game dev colleagues when it came to Fallout 76. Like the big, what I like about kind of being cross-disciplinary and having a foot in both media and games is that I can kind of defend both sides. So like when people start critiquing Fallout 76 so Fallout 76, let's just agree, is a PR nightmare. Like, I mean, it's a terrible situation for them.
I mean, it was a PR nightmare just at the game's release. Every single level that has come since that, all the way up to their customer service website breaking and leaking everyone's info, that's not even a PR nightmare. That is a whole other. Before, it was like a Final Fantasy 14 level PR nightmare, like the original release. Now it is like salt the earth, move on level. Almost.
Can't wait till the dragon comes out of the moon and demolishes the world and they start over.
Exactly. Like, it's like I have a few friends who work for Bethesda, particularly in the Fallout 76 stuff, and I'm just like, oh my god, how are you alive right now? But yeah, I agree with you. It's a nightmare.
But so like it's a nightmare. So like all the stuff that has happened on like the PR, the production side, like the canvas bag debacle, like not really defensible. I actually know a little bit more about that because one of my colleagues, Ruthie Edwards, she is an experience designer. She's in grad school right now, and she knows about the marketing firm that basically so they had an external marketing firm like create the ultimate edition, whatever it was, with all the power armor helmet and all that crap, and basically pitched that to Bethesda. It was like, all right, we think this is what should be in it. So you get the power armor helmet, you want to make that, and then here's this nice canvas bag, West Tech canvas bag that you put the helmet in. And they're like, cool, sounds great. Then they took that promo material that this marketing firm created and then went to go source the materials, but they didn't source, obviously, then we know the rest of the story, that they sourced a nylon bag because the materials weren't readily available, et cetera, but they didn't change any of the promo art or anything. So they basically kind of only half listened to this marketing firm. And then the marketing firm's pissed because they're like, hey, now we're kind of like on the line for your PR mistake because like it's going to reflect poorly on us, even though you're the ones that were making the final decisions. So that whole thing's a big problem. The fucking like getting the surfacing people's contact info, that's a terrible thing. All the technical stuff with the game, like not really that defensible, right? Like, I mean, like frame rate, all that stuff, all that issues. But the problem I have is when people conflate stuff like that with their taste in the game. It's like, so like, and that's where I think people are very bad about tweeting out, discussing about the game as a product, as like, an external commercial thing, and like the business decisions behind that, and then the game as a design. Like if you don't like sim games with like crafting elements and all this stuff, like if you don't like Ark or whatever, and if you don't like Fallout in general, like sure, this isn't going to be a game for you. But don't use like the crap that Bethesda's pulling on the customer service side as an excuse to dunk on the game, because like that just kind of reflects poorly on you. Like those are two different arguments.
Oh, completely. And I mean, like you're literally talking about, it's a cluster, but at the same time, that is the customer service side of things. The way the way that the PR handled everything, the way that customer service has been trained to handle stuff, the way that the entire customer service website broke, that has nothing at all to do with the actual game dev. That has nothing to do with that aspect, and the fact that you can't pull these two things together. And then on top of that, like the thing that always drives me nuts is the people who are popping up on the website before most of this happened, when it was just Fallout 76 was just had its issues and it was a poorly made game, kind of all those kind of things. When all that started, the people popping up like, well, yeah, I mean, Bethesda always has made shitty games and always has, and always
let's just keep going back. It's right, Todd Howard's an asshole. Like, let's just pull Pete Hines, fuck him, just put everything in it.
But the people would just do that. We're like, Todd Howard's an asshole, and they've always made these shitty games. And you finally dig deeper on the person, and they're a person who literally doesn't like Bethesda games because they don't like open world games in general. You could just you just narrow it down so much. Like, they just don't open like world games, so ergo they don't like Elder Scrolls or Fallout or stuff like that. Ergo they don't like Fallout 76. It's like, don't take your personal opinion and factor into it. It's the people who get irrationally mad when a game they don't like gets a perfect score, or irrationally mad when a game they do like gets a 0, 1, whatever. Or games, my game wasn't game of the year. Yeah, your game wasn't game of the year. You're for this particular outlet. This outlet covers adventure games, and you like Call of Duty. What did you expect to happen? It's like, I think a lot of people overhype their own opinions, but undervalue other people's opinions on things. And there's just a failure of an entitlement failure of understanding that there are different things to like and dislike, regardless if a game is good or bad at its actual base technical level.
And I mean, like there's an issue there of kind of like you said, they're separating your personal taste from the value a game may have. Like, I don't like Metal Gear, I don't like Dark Souls, I don't like Monster Hunter. I will never deny that those games have important influences on games in general, and my personal taste does not take that, reduce that equation. I think people have an issue with that. But the other problem is like talking about like the difference between like being an enthusiast and being a game developer. Like when people start armchair game developing, especially in the case of Fallout 76, you have things like, well, this is just because they're using that Gamebryo engine still. And I'm just like, well, I mean, we know nothing. We know nothing about their pipeline because they're not going to tell us. So like the fact that first off, it's not Gamebryo. It's a fork of Gamebryo. It's their creation engine, which, I mean, we can argue about how Gamebryo is creation engine, but also like it's not just creation engine. They had to basically modify the code base because if you saw Daniel Dwyer's No Clip documentary, making a multiplayer Fallout was hard because when the game starts, the code base that they have like pre-built for Skyrim and Fallout 4, it looks for the player character and basically like compiles a bunch of stuff and runs a bunch of commands based off that. When they started introducing multiple player characters, the game broke because it didn't know which one was the actual player character. And so that's when they started calling the player character Atlas, because he basically held up the world. So we don't know anything about that. It's also not Bethesda in Rockville in Maryland. It's Bethesda Austin, which was the Battlecry studio that they retrofitted to be a Bethesda satellite studio after they shelved Battlecry. So we don't know how many of those are new hires, how many of those are just Battlecry devs that knew nothing about the creation engine until they started working on Fallout 76. We know nothing about any of that stuff. So we can't possibly make any claims about how good the code base is or how good the engine is, and also confusing an engine with a code base, because an engine, this broken stuff with like when it was like surfacing people's IP, in the PC beta. Like that is not the engine. Like that is just a coding thing. Like the ini file stuff where you could modify your frame rate. If you unlock the frame rate, it unlocked your run speed. Like that's not just an inherent thing in the engine, at least not from what I understand. Like I think people also have confusion of like what a game engine means and what it does, because like at the most basic level, a game engine can just basically be like a renderer and like, you know, a physics simulation, a physics modeler, and like everything else is just how they have these legacy code bases, which I mean I'm sure they've been evolving and adapting and creating since at least Skyrim, if not Oblivion and Fallout 3 before that.
You would imagine. You would think.
Sorry, that was kind of a long rant, but
no, I my only issue with it is like, okay, I have questions and comments about these four, but I was enjoying it very much. No, but I mean, yeah, no, it makes sense. What was I say? That there was one point you made that I was thinking about. I mean, it just boils down to like it's a lot of it's just the people who know jack shit about game development who just make those comments, those bold comments of this doesn't run well because of this, or this is not how it's supposed to be because of this, and it's like. You literally, your knowledge of game dev is what? You read an article once about game development? Like I've always said it was a friend of my dad's boyfriend growing up who always said about film that everyone needs to learn the basics of film production before they should be allowed to comment on a film being made. And that's the same with, I feel like, almost every medium, but gaming to like the nth degree, because gaming is so much more complicated than a lot of other stuff because there's so many more layers and so many more people work on games that like really like it shouldn't be a requirement that you're not allowed to talk obviously about stuff, but like
right.
But you should have a degree of awareness of how stuff works and how the fundamental shifting of things and just how much one little change can cascade. Before some basic programming knowledge, at least.
Sure, or at the very least, like suss out, like, you know, the games I created for players. I want the players' feedback and whether or not this gameplay mechanic or whatever feels good or is enjoyable. Like that's valid criticism. When we make the A to B of like, you know, I'm not really feeling how this gameplay feels, to I think you should adjust, like, I'm assuming you create it using this, and what you should be actually doing is this. A good example I saw was, I forget who tweeted it. Someone tweeted a picture of, like, some Steam forum thread, and someone was, like, talking about a game, and it was made in Unity, and they're like, well, I found out that this developer was using all of these asset store plugins, and I can't believe that they used Rewired for the control mapping. Can you believe that? And I was like, dude, if you looked at Unity and looked at like the built-in default like controller support, you would want to use Rewired too, because let me tell you, it ain't great. It doesn't recognize an Xbox controller. Like you can't just plug an Xbox controller in and be like, okay, let's go. I was using some like open source like GitHub project that had control map support for Xbox 360 controllers for a long time because it was free. And then when that, you know, open source project stopped being updated, I was like, well, you just got to bite the bullet and pay $40 or however much is for Rewired. And guess what? I'll never have to think about mapping controller support ever again, because I just download that asset and then just do some configuring. And then, hey, look, it has complete controller support. It has ridiculous controller support. If I wanted to smack a HOTAS setup in there and support that, I could do that. I'm never going to do that, but I could.
Yeah, I mean, I'm literally sitting here like, I understand 90% of what you're saying, but my brain is not assimilating the information in the correct order at all. See, I'm one of those people, though, like, one of the reasons why I don't take as much of a journalistic, hard approach to constantly calibrating and what I do with reviews and previews and stuff like that is because I came to a realization that I'm not qualified to be that journalistic side of things person. I'm not qualified to be that reporter talking about this is how this changed and, you know, this is why this game is not good. That's why I kind of went more switched to the influencer side a couple years ago, because just this realization, this like sudden thing where it's like, I don't understand how this works. I mean, I went to school for game design, but I didn't get particularly far. I have a basic understanding of programming. I can make some basic stuff. I've made a few very low end, like, remakes of classic game kind of stuff before, but like at the same time, people start getting into the intricacies of Unity and then how engines work and all these other things. And I sit here and I'm just like, I understand absolutely everything, but I don't understand how you get from A, B, and C to Z. You know what I mean? Like how all those parts and pieces coalesce into, oh, I'm playing Red Dead Redemption, like kind of thing.
Well, Josh, let's talk about object component models.
Sure.
And the sprite renderer in Unity 3D. I think I want to clarify that it kind of sounds like I have a huge chip on my shoulder, but I don't.
I didn't get that at all, personally.
I just think there's value in kind of understanding the other side more and understanding things that you might not before you make assumptions. And I see that, I've mostly been talking about making assumptions about game development and game design, but it happens with the media side too, and it frustrates me. Like the number of times I hear someone say like, "Oh well, IGN's just been bought and paid for. Like this review doesn't mean anything." Like that stuff drives me equally insane. Just because I understand, like obviously I'm not on the press side. I'll say I'm in media, but I'm not in the games press side.
Sure.
But I've listened to enough people talk on the games press side that I know like that's not the case. And also like that's just a really scary thing to say, because that's like a very close, that like toes the line of like a lot of GG stuff really closely, and that's I feel like people don't realize that. Like I had game dev colleagues say like, well, this game award, Rockstar is just walking away with all these game awards because they paid for them. I'm like, that's a really dangerous like line of thinking.
That is a terrible line of thinking, and a dangerous one at that. And no, Rockstar walked away with the awards they did for Red Dead Redemption 2, because even as a person who likes the game but doesn't think it's as a game phenomenal, I think as a technical achievement, it is bafflingly beautiful. Like what the hell? I mean, well, with what they did with the game and stuff like that. So I understand why. Like, so I just, people, again, no matter where you are in whatever industry, it just shows that some things we just get in our head, that we know why this is happening, regardless of the facts of reality.
Yeah. So I mean, and that's why I like what we do, because I try to like educate on both sides, and I mean it's a hard thing, but I think there's a lot of value in it.
No, I agree. Kind of like shifting things. We've talked a little bit about like we've talked a lot now about game development and game side of things, and just like the different outlooks and stuff. But I want to talk to you about a little bit about the media side of things. So you do podcasts and stuff like that, and you have guests on. One of the things I'm always fascinated about talking to fellow podcast hosts, particularly ones who do interviews and even not interviews, but do shows that have a guest, is the process of finding people that or finding people that you don't know to come on the show. You were at our little pre-show, like when we were getting stuff in order, talked about how you had just recently Patrick Lepak on the show. And you've done panels now with Austin Walker. You've talked about a few people. What's the process like for you with one thinking of a guest? Do you have a topic in mind before a guest in mind before a topic to focus on, and then also what is the process for you of reaching out, like more with the like? It's one thing to reach out to a friend or a friend of a friend, but the people you have literally no connection with whatsoever, where you're just like, hey, I like you on Twitter, kind of thing.
Right.
What's that process like for you?
So I did that originally with Patrick Lepak. I think like 2 years ago, I just DM'd him because he has open DMs. I was like, hey, I really like your stuff. Would love to talk to you. And then I never heard anything back, which sounds bad that I'm saying that now because he's an awesome guest. But no, I think there's for me, deciding on which guests I want, it's mostly I said this. I had Khalif Adams on recently too, and we kind of had this kind of retrospective or reflective episode about our respective shows. His was spawned on me and mine with Wordcast, and with the guest stuff, a lot of it is just an excuse to kind of meet my heroes, and then it's the combination of like I feel like I have stuff to say that I think has value and adds value to the conversation. So that's and I want to talk to people that I listen to and that I follow, and I kind of want to add to what they've said in the past. So like when we had Patrick Klepek on, I asked him about, he wrote this article in the wake of Dr. Disrespect kind of taking some time off last year or earlier this year because of some infidelity stuff. And he was talking about like his relationship with fans and like, and they're very open about, Austin and Patrick are very open about that on the Waypoint podcast as well, about like, fans having this kind of, the readers, listeners, they know so much about the creators. Sure. And the creators know so little about them. And I think it creates this weird dissonance with consumers of media, because they want to show, I think in the heart of every listener and reader, and if this isn't the case, then I'm just projecting, they want to feel as valuable to the creator as the creator feels to them. So it's like, I
think that's a desperation thing. I think that I've seen, even with our show, we're smaller side, but I've seen people desperately want to be, over the years, like desperately want to be acknowledged by members of our team because we help them get through something. And I try to get to know people, but and even the larger side people, you try to get to know people sometimes, but that's not how it's like a 1.5 way street,
Right. And I think it's just, there's, it's hard, right? Because the second someone has a platform, you all immediately like put them on a higher pedestal and think like they're larger than life. Like, oh, they're accomplishing this. They can't possibly just be some random schmuck behind a microphone. Like that. There has to be more to it than that. Like, and then once you start doing it, I mean, it's just like game development. It's like once you start doing it, you realize, oh, like this is all they did, and then they just kept doing it and kept doing it really well. And that's how they got to where they are. And then you have a whole different kind of newfound respect for them. But so me trying to find guests was partially kind of that. I was looking for people with unique perspectives, people that I had followed for a long time, people that I cared about, people that had things. I've claimed in the past that I've tried to focus solely on the indie dev side, but it's kind of been more indie dev and media. I don't do a lot of AAA. And I think if I were to do more AAA guests, it would focus on like individual creators within AAA. Like I had Michael Listo. He is a mocap specialist. He was at 2K for a while, and now he's at Infinity Ward in LA. And he had a great perspective on like motion cap and rigging and all that stuff. He's this creator, this individual creator inside of a larger machine of whatever AAA studio he's in. And I think I value that more than if I were to get, I don't know, Bobby Kotick on or Corey Barlog. Even though I really like what Corey Barlog's doing, I would love, again, not saying I wouldn't have him on. I'm saying that
clarify.
I think there's something interesting to just talking to a tech artist on the Sony Santa Monica team as opposed to always talking to the lead designer, because the lead designer constantly has the spotlight. And they deserve it because they worked on that game just as hard as anyone else on that team did. But I would like to hear from individual people, especially like in where we are now with like unionization in games and labor organization. Like individual voices need to be showcased, especially in large teams like that. But it's mostly been media and indie dev. And it's a combination of just like cold emailing people and people randomly following me, and I'm like, oh, that guy's cool, I'm gonna go talk to them. And really the best way to have people on your stuff is just to go to conventions. I mean, this, the more shows you go to, the more chances you get to run into someone randomly and you give me your business card or say like, hey, can I hit you up afterwards? Getting Austin Walker on the PAX West panel was actually really funny because it was me at PAX East in the West End, that's right next to the convention center. Which, secret tip, if there's anyone you want to meet on like the media side or something, they're usually in the West End, either at the bar or at that Starbucks, either before or after like convention hours. So just like hot tip. And now that West End's gonna be flooded with people. But the I was standing in line with my friends to get coffee at that Starbucks, and they got their coffee, and so we started walking away. And Austin and Patrick walked up to stand in line. I'm like, Austin Walker, Patrick Lepak, I'd love to talk to them. And so I just walked up and like just struck up a conversation. And I was talking about my panel. I was talking like how what their plans were for that weekend. It was actually really funny because it's like, so I'm doing this panel with Felix Kramer, who's been on 2 of the panels this year, and they're awesome. I also had the co-host or the co-founder of Ward Games, Mason. He was there, going to be on the panel, and then also Mike Footer, who wrote a book about business dev for games with Mike Bithell, and they used to be a game informer. And when I said Mike Footer, like Patrick perked up. He's like, "Oh, that's cool." So it's like, "Oh, awesome!" Like cachet with having press people into your thing. And so we chatted a little bit, and then I left. And then that same weekend, I was helping Finji, because I have friends at Finji. I was helping run their booth, and Becca Saltzman asked me to go on a coffee run. So I went back into that same line, was standing there, and Austin Walker walks up again, and he goes into like that gift shop that's over there. And I'm like, well, I'm going to talk to Austin Walker again. So I bounced out of the line for a second and walked in there and started talking to him. I was like, "Hey, how'd your weekend go? How'd your panel go?" He's like, "Great." "How'd your panel go?" I was like, "Awesome. Do you want to be on it at West?" He was like, "That sounds great." And I'm like, "Cool." And then we just kind of email correspondence back and forth. So it's like, that was just like dumb luck, like multiple times dumb luck. Cause it's like, that wasn't something that was predictable. And then like, and I just keep doing that. Just more people, or I, purposely go out. So like I had Jonathan Nordhagen, who is the lead designer on Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. He was showing his game at a thing at the Smithsonian Institute this summer. And the Smithsonian's only 2 hours away from where I live. So I drove up there for a day, and also had friends that were showing off their stuff there too. Struck up a conversation with him to get him on the show. Also, Robin Hunnicky was there, and they were showing off their VR project with Phenomena. I was talking to her. So it's a lot of that. It's a lot of just like, the more you have to go out. I just had the Juggernaut devs on 2 weeks ago, and they were just like, yeah. And they were like, "We live in Minnesota. Nothing happens in Minnesota. Like, we didn't get this Nintendo deal to get on Switch by staying in Minnesota. We went to Indiecade, we went to E3, we went to GDC. Like, you have to go out there." And I agree, you have to go out there. And like, you'd be surprised, like, who will be willing to talk to you. You'd be surprised when you go to GDC and you go to dinner with Anya, and Mike Bithell's here too. So I'm going to talk to Mike Bithell for a night and then get him on the show. Like, stuff like that happens.
Oh, that's like the nature of how a lot of these things, like, what I always say to content creators, podcasters, like, and streamers, there's different levels. Like any business, like any career, there's different levels. But if you want to break through to another level of things, you've got to leave your house. You've got to go to either the bare minimum local events if you live in a place that actually has local events, but you have to actually go to at least, go to 1 PAX a year. If you can get into E3, go to E3. You got to go to the places. And more importantly, as you said, you've got to go to the places not on the show floor. You've got to go to the bars, you don't drink, cool, still go to a bar and get, you don't drink coffee, still go to Starbucks. Like, it sounds ridiculous and a little creepy, and it can be. I mean, legitimately like, there are some creepier moments, but that's how life works. Life works by coming across people. I've had some in my early part of my career, some really major podcast guests, which were just kind of like, I lucked out and just messaged the person, or I knew the right person kind of stuff. But most of the ones we've had have been just those fortunate moments. I had been trying to get Brandon Stennis, who now, a streamer, but now works for Versus Evil as an influencer manager. I'd wanted him on the show. He was one of the people in January. I set up a list that I don't think I posted publicly. I don't remember anymore, but of people I wanted on the show. And I'd been trying to get in contact with him here and there for a little bit, but I was an unknown entity. Bumped into each other at a party that I got invited to at E3. I said hi to him. I'm friends with the person he works with, who says, "Oh yeah, Josh is a good guy." And suddenly he's on my show 2 weeks later. After like all of that, after all of that lengthy here and there haphazard effort, it's like you meet the person in the real world, because that's the thing. When you are behind a keyboard, the anonymity that allows people to be assholes also, even if you're a good person, allows you to not exist.
Right, because they don't know that.
Yeah. You are just another avatar, regardless if it's your face or some random thing. You're just another avatar with another
anime character, maybe anime
character, maybe an egg. With some random name, maybe with some random numbers. But you all, all of us sink into this same vortex of nonsense, and it's hard to distinguish. So until you go meet someone in person, you're that's just what you are. You're just out there, but you're not gonna don't go to an event expecting you're suddenly gonna be best friends with like some game developer you admire or some person who works in whatever industry you're trying to either break into or bring people onto your content with. But once you're out there, for the longest time, I was just some schmuck who was emailing PR people and being like, "Hey, I'd like to play your game." Oh, and they'd look and they directly ask me for stats, or they would look it up and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, that last article you put only had like 10 clicks, or that stream you did had like 2 concurrent viewers over 6 hours. Why would we give you this code?" You suddenly go to an event and you show who you are, you show your personality, you show, you explain what you're doing. Don't literally go up to someone and be like, "Hi, I streamer," but you go up to someone and just have a normal human being conversation, and then it falls in, you do all that, and then suddenly it's like, "Hey, I'm now reviewing or streaming this major title that I have been dreaming of." It's networking is a dirty word, but it's a useful word.
Right. And it makes you realize, like you said, the fear of people being assholes online. Mm-hmm. When you meet people in real life, you realize like no one in this industry is an asshole, and there's a good reason for that.
No one who survives in this industry is an asshole. Let's clarify that.
Yes. But in my experience, I've never met a mean-spirited person like talking to anyone at any of these shows, whether it's on the media or the game dev side. Like never had a bad interaction where it's like, well, that person's terrible.
My experience though is there's 2 experiences. One,
anecdotes. I'm excited.
Well, there's always like the experience of, like I meet someone in the industry and I think, they're the sweetest person. And there'll be sometimes the people I truly trust. There's a couple of people in this industry who are the sweetest, most loving people. Everyone knows they're the sweetest, most loving people. Yes, we're talking about Kyle Gatto. We all know Kyle Gatto. But I'll be talking to someone sometimes at a bar and think there's a sweet person, and Kyle will literally like DM me or nudge me and be like, kind of thing, because there's something in the background with that one person. I'm not going to name names for this, sure, but there will be those kind of things where it's like, and there's other people I know who are my little like knowledge base, people who just like, you be wary, kind of things. But what I was to say was I hadn't had experiences where back at PAX West, I think it was either 2017 or 2016. I don't remember. I had an interaction with someone. I thought they were just a complete asshole. I thought they were rude. I thought, and not like, I didn't think I did anything to deserve it. I sometimes, get in my own head. I'm like, well, maybe I came on too strong. Maybe I said this, maybe something like that. But I'm like, I'm pretty sure I was a perfectly polite person and they were a dick for no reason. I happened to give them my business card as part of the whole thing. I got an email after PAX West, maybe a week later, from this person being like, "I was a dick to you. I was a dick to a few people that day. We found out X thing about a project we're working on, and I was in a bad place, and I just wanted to let you know. I'm sorry." And I got that email. I was like, okay, I'm just a fan of yours now. Like the ability to hold yourself culpable for that bad of behavior. You could have just let that slid, and any smart person would have been like, they're at an event, I'm not gonna get mad at them, kind of thing. But you actually, okay, I was in.
Yeah, it's always a great feeling. Like, I mean, I had that feeling like one champion people that were really nice. Like I've had nothing but the nicest interactions with Jeff Gershman, and it's been like this. It was funny because like the first time I ever met him like in person was we were setting it. Well, we just finished our panel at PAX East this year, and Felix was like, "I'm staying in this room because the panel I'm on with Dave Lang is also in this room." I was like, "Oh, cool." So I'm like sitting there like packing up all my crap. Turn around, Dave Lang, Jeff Gershman on the stage. Like I was like, "Oh, hello, hi, nice to finally meet you, person who I've followed for a long time." And then like at West, I was gonna see it was one of Pat Bear's panels, and so I was like walking over to it. And Jeff was just like standing there waiting for the room to clear out. And I was like, "Hey, Jeff, I don't know if you remember me, but I ran that Hidden Gems panel. We said hi for a second." He was like, "Oh, yeah." It's like, "Hey, how you doing?" I was like, "Great. Feel a lot better now that you remembered me. That feels awesome." But yeah, like there's a fear when you know someone not in person and you're like, okay, like, is this person cool? You cool? Are we cool? And then you meet them and they're super nice. And you're like, oh, what was I worried about?
Yeah, that's at Constantly Calibrating, we jokingly call that the Greg Miller effect because
Greg Miller's awesome. I've met him multiple times. He's awesome.
yeah, same here. Like Greg is one of those people that most people I know are like, Greg is a big, loudmouth, bombastic kind of human being, and who's been in the industry for a while, is followed by a lot of people, and his shtick is everyone in the kind of funny community is my best friend, and everyone's like, there's no way this guy's genuine, there's no way this guy's a nice, person. I've had people on my team who hadn't met him who just like, it's a shtick, kind of thing, and those of us who've met him or done stuff with him would be like, just meet him. You meet him, it's like, no, he is nice almost to a fault. He is a sweetheart and legitimately does care about every human being who talks to him. And it's fascinating, like that experience.
Right. So at that same messenger party, he showed up. I don't know if you had left at that point or anything.
I was there very drunk until I was kicked out. That's the drunkest I've ever been in my entire life, honestly.
Was Nigel just like, hey, you gotta go?
It was just a case of I'm friendly with Greg and with Jen, but I got very drunk and started telling Greg of how much he meant to me. Which he appreciated, to be clear. I emailed him, be like, hey, I went too far, and he's like, nope, you're good. But and Jen, who from Pop Agenda, who ran the event, told me she thought it was the funniest shit. So I was good. I discovered I didn't screw up, there. No, but I was there pretty much until that event was closing out.
But sometimes when you say like, I'm a podcaster, and someone feel like, like, okay, like,
good for you,
but
sweetie.
What do you really do?
Yep.
So are you like homeless or what? But no, I walked up to Greg because he came onto the roof. I was like, oh, Greg Miller. It's like I've talked to him briefly at East. I'll go say hi. So I was like, hey, Greg. I was like, how you doing? Blah blah blah. Khalif is on my panel here. He's like, oh, awesome, love Khalif's. Like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I'm a podcaster. He's like, oh, okay, cool. And then I forget who walked up to him. It might have been Jen. I don't remember, but he was like, oh, this is Dylan. He's a podcaster. I was like, oh, like, you didn't think that was bullshit. Nope. That's cool.
I mean, that's literally what they do. I mean, they are an extremely far-reaching podcast network is really what it boils down to. Like, that is their bread and butter. They've just grown in a way that I don't think anyone foresaw. So he definitely has an understanding of those kind of things. So kind of getting to the end of kind of our time here, but one thing I wanted to discuss. We're at the end of the year, even though this episode might not go out until the new year, but it's still a topic I'm trying to talk about everyone at this point. A lot of people talk game of the year. A lot of people talk about what's the best game or what's my favorite game. What's more important to me is what was your best or favorite gaming experience this year.
Ooh.
It doesn't even have to be a game that came out this year, just something that in 2018 you played. Just the example people who've watching and listening to the show have heard me say this a few times. My example is swinging around New York in Spider-Man. I think the game has some issues. I love the story. I think the game has some issues, but was nothing more freeing than swinging around my home city. And just after I 100% of that game, I had nothing to do in the game anymore. I still swung around that city for a good couple of hours. It was my end of the day just to release kind of thing for a few weeks there. So that's kind of one of my experiences.
Right. Do you just want me to tell one, or because I got a handful?
You can give me a couple. Yeah, give me a couple.
Okay. So first off, we make a big deal about going to MagFest because that's kind of like our local big con. It's in National Harbor, Maryland, so it's like right on the other side of the Potomac. There's always some really cool stuff there. Baby Castles always has like a big setup there with their stuff. If you're familiar with them, they're like that clicky indie New York's collective.
Okay.
There's this indie video game console called Dobotone, Dobotone, and it's basically it's a box with all these knobs and switches, and there are point counters on it, and it's 4-player, and it's like blue, orange, yellow, purple, I think, are the colors for the players, and the controller, it's hardwired in there. The controller is like it's like a Jeopardy buzzer.
Okay.
I think there are 2 buttons on it, and there are a bunch of different mini games built into the box. So like there's one where it's like you have to build a cheeseburger. There's like a picture of the cheeseburger you have to build, and you have to like cycle through the different toppings. It's like, all right, this one's going to be, bottom bun burger, cheeseburger top bun, and so you have to like do it, and you want to get it. And every time you assemble one correctly, you get a point, and the point shows up physically on the box, and then you keep going. And there's a bunch of different ones. There's like a karate one where you like do like a jump kick, but you can also manipulate stuff, and there are physical knobs on the thing that you can manipulate.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah. So you can manipulate like the gravity, you can manipulate like the sides of the screen, so you can like zoom it way out or zoom it way in. And it's a lot of fun. And I played it. It was me, my friend Will Blanton, and then his wife Julie. We were playing it together, and it was like so much fun. And one of those experiences you can only get like at a convention.
Sure. Which
I really value. It's like multi-bowl. Like you can only play multi-bowl or Killer Queen or whatever like at a physical location because they're so rare. What else? Enter the Gungeon I played a lot of this year. I never played it before, and I'm not a big roguelike guy. I think the only roguelike I actually like is Rogue Legacy.
Okay.
But this is so close to Rogue Legacy. Obviously, the mechanics are a little different, but it has that same kind of roguelite feel to it.
It's that similar, yeah. The way the roguelite stuff is handled is very similar.
Right. And it's it came out, I forget when it came out on Switch, but I mean, I bought it early this year and dumped probably like 60 hours into it, and just like didn't know. I mean, that was probably one of my favorite games this year just because I put so much time into it. Then there's Mario Tennis Aces. The multiplayer Mario Tennis Aces is fantastic. Rami and I were gushing about it on Twitter one day. I was like, this is like some of the most tactical like minutia in a multiplayer game in a long time. It's like they took a tennis court and just made it like sky's the limit. It's fantastic. Like when you get down into it, it's like fifth dimensional chess playing Mario Tennis Aces. I really like it. You know, my friends not so much, but man, that game can go places. And then just to keep it short, I think I finally played Deltarune after not playing it for a couple weeks. Undertale is probably one of my favorite games. I legitimately think Toby Fox is the best comedy writer in existence. I'm not a big comedy fan. Like I don't watch comedy movies because I don't really laugh at them.
Okay.
Undertale and Deltarune are so ridiculously funny. They have some of the best comedic timing in the world. Just because, you know, it's just text boxes, but sometimes they take the control of the text box speed away from you and manipulate it. It's some of the best writing in a game, and it's also so cherishable. Like that's what I loved about about Undertale. It's like some of the most like heartwarming stuff. I feel like it's the game made for me, like for my like persona, my deep down soul. Like I never knew like this was the game I could identify with the most. But I think, yeah, Deltarune, I'm glad I finally played it, like even though it was free, and I was like, Undertale is one of my favorite games, I need to play this, but it took me a while to get to it just because I was so freaking busy.
That makes sense. I mean, those are actually a lot of great options. I still have not played it. In the case
it's
of
great.
I've owned it for a long time. One of our old writers wrote a really phenomenal piece on it years ago that like I was like, I got to play this game now. I went and bought it, and then life, you know what I mean? Like, you know, you get sidetracked. But no, those are some great experiences. As I said, I love hearing what people, because everyone finds different things. Like when I asked that question, I don't know if I would have expected like Enter the Gungeon and Deltarune / Undertale, and like you went places I wouldn't have thought of. So right. I love learning what people's experiences, what matters kind of to them, or what affected them in the year. It's always cool. So, Dylan, thank you for joining for the show. Where can people find you? Where can people find what you're working on, what you're doing?
All right, this list might just be as long as the best game experiences one. But if you would like to check out our podcast, Wardcast, you can find it at ward-games.com. We do it every week. Like I said, Patrick Klepek, we just had him on recently, and his episode went up this weekend. Usually we try to get it up every Saturday. I sometimes have a delay on it. That was the last guest episode for this year, and we're now going into the final roundtable. And then we have our Game of the Year stuff is a little different. We do something called Best Games Played, where we don't, solely make it only about the games that came out that year. It's about any game we played this year. Just because I feel like that's fair. Sometimes you just don't get to a game when it came out its calendar year. So that's where you can find us on the web. You can also find us on Twitter at Ward Video Games, and we post all the episodes up there. Or you just search Wardcast, WARDCAST, on your podcast player of choice. Then on top of that, if you're interested in game dev and you live in the Mid-Atlantic area, I would recommend checking out RVA Game Jams. It's RVA Game Jams basically everywhere: Twitter, Facebook, online, rvagamejams.com. We host a bunch of game jams every year, and we'd love to have more people that are, in Virginia and beyond come and play games with us. We do a big blowout with Global Game Jam at the end of January. We have a guest. We haven't announced who it is yet, but I think people will really like it. Right. And if you want to see me in person, I'm going to be at MagFest, Awesome Games Done Quick, and PAX South in January.
I'll see you at one of those.
Yeah. So MagFest, we're doing a panel called How to Make a Game in 48 Hours. It's going to be me and two other people from our collective in Richmond, and then also Adria Wallach is coming in to talk about her perspective on Train Jam. And then I'll be at Awesome Games Done Quick, just watching speed runs. If you want to come find me, I'll be the guy with the shaved head and the beard, and and then at PAX South, Hidden Gems, Discovering the Undiscovered at PAX South. I think it's on that Friday. I don't have the time. I want to say it's like 5 or 6. That schedule will go out soon. Mm-hmm. It's gonna be me, Anya Combs, Harris Foster of community manager at Finji, and we might have another guest lined up, and I'll announce that shortly.
Fair enough. Sorry, laugh. Literally, an email notification popped up from Harris Foster as you said his fucking name, because they're sending out.
Fuck that guy.
Because they're sending out keys related to something. One of the games we're working on, and that literally that notification just popped up on my screen right about a moment before you said his name, and I was like, "Computer." Your timing is amazing. Also, I don't know how I didn't realize beforehand, because I saw the Patrick Lepak podcast. I did not realize you titled it The Quiet Man Fan, and that makes me irrationally happy.
It's really good. I introduced him as such. I was like, number 1 Quiet Man fan. He's like, I'll take it. I was like, good.
So love it. Well, thank you again for joining for the show, and for anyone else out there, thank you for joining us. Thank you for. Wow, this is the point that I lose.
Retake.
This is the point that I lose my voice. Okay, thank you for. Take three. Thank you all for joining us this week. This show is live as we get guests right here on mixer.com/ConCalPod. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/ConstantCalibrating, Twitter at ConCalPod. I'm at Bear Punch. Check Instagram at instagram.com/ConstantCalibrating, but most importantly, check out Discord at ConstantCalibrating.com/Discord to get the most up-to-date info on everything related to constant calibrating, including bonus entries for contests and the ability to further influence our content. Oh, don't forget ConstantCalibrating.com. That site's kind of important too. Lots of reviews and stuff going up pretty regularly now. We have a decent schedule, pipeline actually working out. So hey, who knew that was possible? Please make sure to leave us a review wherever you're able to. It does really help get the podcast in front of more listeners. iTunes and Spotify help the most. And with that, dear viewers and listeners, I bid you a good sign off.